The wind outside sounded like a banshee having a particularly bad day, which Dr. Elena Vasquez supposed was fitting given that Zirian 7's weather pattern seemed designed by someone with a grudge against meteorology. She pressed her face against the reinforced viewport of the Kepler research outpost, watching ice crystals the size of dinner plates slam against the transparent aluminum with enough force to make the whole structure shudder. "Another lovely evening in paradise," she muttered, taking a sip of coffee that had been brewing so long it could probably qualify as a geological formation. The storm had been raging for 3 days now, keeping her trapped inside with nothing but her botanical samples, a collection of increasingly stale jokes, and the dubious company of Aria, the station's AI, whose idea of conversation involved reciting atmospheric pressure readings with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. Elena turned back to her workstation, where specimens of Zirian 7's native flora sat under grow lights, looking about as enthusiastic as she felt. The purple-leafed Cryophylla zirionensis was supposed to be her ticket to xenobotanical fame, but so far it had demonstrated all the survival instincts of a chocolate teapot. 3 months of careful cultivation, and the best she'd managed was to keep them from dying faster than she could take notes. "Aria, remind me again why I volunteered for this assignment," she called out to the empty lab. "According to your personnel file, Dr. Vasquez, you indicated a desire to get away from people who think soil samples are boring conversation starters," the AI replied in its annoyingly cheerful voice. "You also mentioned something about wanting to boldly go where no botanist has gone before, though I should note that 17 xenobotanists have preceded you on Zirian 7. Thanks for crushing my dreams with facts, Aria. Really appreciate it." Elena was considering whether her plants would judge her for talking to them when movement outside caught her eye. At first, she thought it was just debris caught in the storm's fury, but something about the way it moved struck her as wrong. Debris didn't usually crawl. She pressed her face back against the viewport, squinting through the chaos of ice and wind. There, barely visible in the swirling whiteness, was definitely a figure. Humanoid, moving with the desperate, stumbling gait of someone fighting against the storm's brutal assault. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," Elena breathed. "Aria, are you detecting any life signs outside the perimeter?" There was a pause that felt longer than it should have. "Negative, Dr. Vasquez. All external sensors show no biological activity beyond the expected microbial levels in the storm system." Elena watched the figure collapse about 50 meters from the station's main entrance, and her heart did something complicated in her chest. Either her sensors were malfunctioning, or whatever was out there wasn't registering as terrestrial life. Which, given that they were on an alien planet, opened up some interesting possibilities. The smart thing to do would be to follow protocol. Lock down the station, contact Earth Command, and wait for instructions that would probably arrive sometime after the heat death of the universe. The figure outside would likely be dead by then, but at least the paperwork would be properly filed. Elena looked at her coffee, then at her dying plants, then back at the storm. You know what? Screw protocol. She grabbed her environmental suit from its charging station, ignoring Aria's increasingly frantic warnings about unauthorized external operations and the 17 different ways the storm could kill her. The list was impressively creative, ranging from the straightforward hypothermia to the more exotic, crystalline particle abrasion resulting in gradual dissolution of exposed tissue. "Aria, if I die out there, make sure my research notes mention that the Cryophylla specimens are basically fancy purple weeds. Future botanists shouldn't waste their time." The airlock cycled with mechanical efficiency, and Elena stepped into a world that was trying very hard to sand her down to her component atoms. The storm hit her like a physical blow, ice crystals stinging through her suit's protective barriers and winds strong enough to make her question her life choices. Which, to be fair, had been questionable for a while now. Fighting against the wind, she made her way toward where she'd seen the figure fall. Her suit's heads-up display painted helpful warnings across her vision about dangerous wind speeds and suboptimal visibility, as if she needed a computer to tell her that walking through an alien ice storm was inadvisable. She found the figure huddled against a rocky outcropping, and Elena's breath caught in her throat. It was definitely humanoid, but the proportions were subtly wrong in a way that made her scientific brain start cataloging differences. The limbs were too graceful, the build too delicate for the harsh environment. And when she knelt beside the trembling form, she could see what looked like long, pointed ears protruding from beneath matted hair. "Well," Elena said aloud, her voice lost in the wind, "this is either first contact, or I've been alone too long and I'm hallucinating elves." The figure stirred at her approach, revealing a face that was unmistakably female and undeniably not human. The features were too refined, the bone structure too elegant, and those ears definitely hadn't come from any terrestrial evolutionary tree. Large eyes, currently squeezed shut against the storm, fluttered open and fixed on Elena with an expression of pure terror. Elena held up her hands in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peaceful intent. "Hey there. I'm guessing you're not from around here." "Well, technically, neither am I, but that's beside the point." The alien girl tried to scramble backward, but exhaustion and cold had clearly taken their toll. She managed about half a meter before collapsing again, her lips moving in what might have been words in a language that sounded like wind chimes having a conversation. "Okay, look," Elena shouted over the storm, feeling ridiculous for trying to communicate with someone who probably couldn't understand a word she was saying. "I know this is the part in every first contact story where everything goes horribly wrong, but I'm offering you the chance to not freeze to death. It's a limited time offer." The alien girl stared at her with wide eyes that seemed to hold depths Elena couldn't fathom. Then, slowly, she nodded. Getting her back to the station was an exercise in creative problem-solving and questionable physics. The alien girl was lighter than she should have been, which Elena filed away under interesting biological adaptations to investigate later, assuming they both survived the next 10 minutes. By the time they reached the airlock, Elena was pretty sure she'd lost feeling in at least 3 extremities and gained a new appreciation for the phrase, "freezing your ass off." The airlock cycled again, and they stumbled into the blessed warmth of the station. Elena pulled off her helmet and immediately set about helping her unexpected guest out of what appeared to be the tattered remains of some kind of environmental suit that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought fashion was more important than function. "Aria," Elena called out, steadying the alien girl as she swayed on her feet, "please tell me the medical bay is still functioning." "Medical bay is operational, Dr. Vasquez. However, I should point out that my medical protocols are designed for human physiology. I cannot guarantee appropriate treatment for unknown species." "Yeah, well, we'll improvise. Wouldn't be the first time." Elena guided her guest toward the medical bay, noting the way the alien girl moved with a natural grace that made her own movements feel clumsy by comparison. Those pointed ears twitched at every sound, and Elena found herself wondering about the auditory range of whatever species she was dealing with. In the medical bay's warm light, Elena got her first clear look at her unexpected visitor. The resemblance to a human was striking, but the differences were fascinating. The alien girl's skin had a faint luminescence to it, and her hair, now that it was drying, revealed subtle prismatic highlights that shifted in the light. Those ears were definitely the most obvious non-human feature, elegant and pointed, giving her an otherworldly beauty that made Elena feel like she was hosting royalty in her bathrobe. "So," Elena said, settling the alien girl onto the medical bay's examination table and wrapping a thermal blanket around her shoulders, "I'm Elena. And you are definitely not what I expected to find in my Tuesday evening plans." The alien girl looked at her with those remarkable eyes and spoke in that musical language again. The sounds were beautiful, like hearing water flow over stones, but completely incomprehensible. Elena rubbed her temple and considered her options. She could contact Earth Command and turn this into an official first contact situation, complete with protocols, committees, and enough red tape to gift wrap a space station. Or she could keep this quiet, at least until her guest was in better condition to handle whatever bureaucratic nightmare was waiting for them. She looked at the alien girl, who was still shivering despite the thermal blanket, and made her decision. "Well," Elena said, moving toward the medical replicator, "first things first. Let's get some food into you. I hope whatever evolutionary path your people took included the ability to process coffee, because it's basically the only thing keeping me functional these days. The alien girl tilted her head at Elena's words, those pointed ears perking up in a way that was actually quite endearing. Elena found herself smiling for the first time in days. "Welcome to Kepler Research Outpost," she said, raising her coffee mug in a mock toast. "Population, formerly 1, currently 2, and officially still 1 according to the paperwork. Try not to let the accommodations fool you, this is actually the luxury model." Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the small medical bay, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the simple pleasure of not being alone. 2 weeks had passed since Elena's impromptu rescue mission, and she was beginning to think that alien houseguests came with an instruction manual written in a language that definitely wasn't covered in her xenobiology courses. The alien girl, whom Elena had taken to calling Lyra after her melodic way of speaking, had proven to be full of surprises, most of which involved making Elena question everything she thought she knew about botany. "Aria, please tell me that what I'm seeing in Greenhouse Bay 3 is some kind of sensor malfunction," Elena said, staring at her tablet display while balancing a cup of coffee that had achieved the consistency of motor oil. "All sensors are functioning within normal parameters, Dr. Vasquez. The Cryophilia zirionensis specimens are indeed demonstrating a 700% increase in growth rate and cellular density." Elena looked across the lab at Lyra, who was humming softly while apparently having a conversation with one of the supposedly dying specimens. The plant, which had been doing its best impression of botanical roadkill for 3 months, was now practically glowing with health and had sprouted enough new growth to qualify as a small shrub. "Right," Elena muttered. "Because that's totally normal." She discovered Lyra's unusual relationship with plant life 3 days ago when she'd found the alien girl in the greenhouse at dawn, sitting cross-legged among the specimens with her hands pressed against the soil. At first, Elena had assumed she was just curious about the plants, but then she'd noticed the way the Cryophilia leaves had started to shimmer and the way new growth was literally unfurling while she watched. "Lyra," Elena called out, using the name she'd started using when simple pointing and gesturing had proven inadequate for daily communication. "What exactly are you doing to my plants?" Lyra looked up from her botanical consultation, those remarkable pointed ears perking up at the sound of her adopted name. She responded in her musical language, but over the past 2 weeks, Elena had started to pick up on tonal patterns that suggested meaning. This particular combination of sounds felt like an explanation, though Elena was roughly as fluent in musical alien as she was in quantum mechanics. "Aria, any progress on the linguistic analysis?" "I have identified 17 distinct tonal patterns and approximately 43 recurring sound combinations that appear to have semantic meaning. However, without a larger sample size or a reference framework, translation remains approximately as accurate as randomly selecting words from a dictionary. So, basically useless. I prefer the term statistically challenged, Dr. Vasquez." Elena approached the greenhouse bay where Lyra was working, noting the way the alien girl's presence seemed to have transformed the entire space. Plants that had been struggling to maintain basic survival were now thriving in ways that violated several laws of botanical science. The air itself felt different, charged with an energy that made Elena's scientific instruments register readings that were either groundbreaking or completely impossible. Lyra held up one of the Cryophilia specimens, its purple leaves now deep and vibrant, and spoke in her chiming language while gesturing toward Elena and then back to the plant. Her expression was earnest, as if she was trying to explain something important. "I'm going to go out on a limb here," Elena said, settling down beside Lyra among the plants, "and guess that you're not just really good at gardening." In response, Lyra placed her hands on either side of a particularly sickly specimen that Elena had been planning to use as a control group. She closed her eyes and began humming, a low, resonant sound that seemed to harmonize with frequencies Elena couldn't quite hear. The plant's leaves began to straighten, their color deepening from sickly yellow-green to rich purple, and Elena watched in fascination as new growth literally materialized before her eyes. "Okay," Elena said slowly, "that's either biotechnology so advanced it looks like magic, or actual magic that looks like biotechnology. Either way, it's definitely not covered in the standard xenobotany textbooks." Lyra opened her eyes and smiled, the first genuine smile Elena had seen from her since the rescue. It transformed her face completely, and Elena found herself grinning back without thinking about it. You know what? Let's call it biokinesis for now. Makes me feel better about my scientific credentials. Their communication had evolved into a complex system of gestures, drawings, and what Elena had started thinking of as interpretive botany. Lyra could apparently make plants demonstrate concepts, which was both incredibly useful and slightly unnerving. When Elena had tried to explain the concept of time, Lyra had made a flower bloom, flourish, and wither and fast forward, then looked at Elena expectantly. Show off, Elena had muttered, but she'd been impressed despite herself. The breakthrough in their communication had come yesterday when Elena had been trying to explain Earth's ecology using her tablet's database. She'd pulled up images of Earth forests, and Lyra's reaction had been immediate and heartbreaking. The alien girl had touched the screen with trembling fingers, her musical language taking on tones that needed no translation. Grief was apparently universal. Through a combination of pointing, drawing, and what Elena could only describe as botanical charades, Lyra had managed to convey that her people were refugees. Their world was dying, and they'd been scattered across the galaxy in small groups, searching for places where they could survive. Elena had felt something twist in her chest when she realized that Lyra was probably alone, cut off from her people and stranded on a planet that was barely habitable for humans, let alone alien botanists with pointed ears. Arya, pull up the communication logs for the last 2 weeks. Any unusual signals or transmissions? Negative, Dr. Vasquez. All communications have been routine check-ins with Earth Command. No unusual signals detected. Elena looked at Lyra, who was now demonstrating what appeared to be an advanced composting technique to a group of fascinated seedlings. The alien girl caught her watching and tilted her head in that curious way she had, ears twitching slightly. Your people, Elena said, pointing to Lyra and then making a sweeping gesture that she hoped conveyed the concept of others like you. Where are they? Lyra's expression grew sad, and she gestured toward the viewport that showed Zirian 7's star-filled sky. She held up her hands, spreading her fingers wide, then brought them together slowly until only one finger remained extended. The message was clear enough to make Elena's heart ache. Scattered, Elena said softly. And you ended up here. Lyra nodded, then did something that surprised Elena. She reached out and touched Elena's hand, her touch warm and somehow comforting, then pointed to herself, to Elena, and to the thriving plants around them. The meaning felt clear, they were making something good together. Elena was about to respond when Arya's voice cut through the moment with the timing of a particularly inconsiderate alarm clock. Dr. Vasquez, I am detecting an incoming transmission from Earth Command. Priority level indicates an official communication requiring immediate response. Elena felt her stomach drop somewhere into the vicinity of her boots. Earth Command didn't do social calls, and the last thing she needed right now was official attention while she was harboring an undocumented alien with apparently magical gardening abilities. Can you delay the transmission? Tell them I'm in the middle of a critical botanical procedure. The transmission is marked as urgent, Dr. Vasquez. Delay is not recommended. Arya, put the transmission through to my quarters. And, maybe don't mention that life support readings have been showing consumption patterns for 2 people. Dr. Vasquez, I am required to maintain accurate records of all station operations. Right, but you're not required to volunteer information that isn't specifically requested, are you? There was a pause that Elena chose to interpret as artificial intelligence contemplation rather than moral judgment. That interpretation of my protocols is, technically correct. I love technicalities, Elena said, then turned to Lyra. Okay, here's the plan. I'm going to go deal with the people who pay for this research station, and you're going to stay here and try not to perform any more botanical miracles until I get back. Think you can manage that? Lyra responded with a string of musical sounds that Elena was pretty sure translated to either, I understand, or, your coffee tastes like industrial solvent. Given that both were probably true, Elena decided to take it as agreement. She made her way to her quarters, trying to think of plausible explanations for why her research had suddenly started producing results that bordered on the impossible. By the time she reached the communication console, she'd settled on a combination of careful wording and strategic optimism. The transmission connected, revealing the stern face of Commander Torres, Earth Command's liaison for frontier research operations. Torres had the expression of someone who'd spent her entire career dealing with scientists who thought regulations were more like suggestions. "Dr. Vasquez, we've been reviewing your recent research reports. Your botanical specimens are showing growth rates and adaptation patterns that our analysis team finds unusual." Elena forced what she hoped was a confident smile. "Well, Commander, breakthrough research tends to produce unusual results. That's why they call it breakthrough research." "Indeed. However, the energy readings from your station have also increased significantly. Our concern is that you may be dealing with unknown factors that could pose safety risks." Elena's mind raced. The energy readings were probably related to whatever Lyra was doing with the plants, but she couldn't exactly explain that without revealing the whole situation. "I've been experimenting with some new cultivation techniques," she said, which was technically true. "Nothing dangerous, just pushing the boundaries of what we thought was possible with alien flora." Commander Torres studied her for a moment that felt approximately 3 hours long. "Dr. Vasquez, we're scheduling a routine inspection of your facility. A team will arrive within the next 72 hours. Elena felt her carefully constructed world start to crumble around the edges. 72 hours to figure out how to hide an alien with biokinetic abilities and explain why her research had suddenly started defying the laws of botany. "That's wonderful, Commander. I look forward to showing the team my progress." After the transmission ended, Elena sat in her quarters and considered her options. She could confess everything and hope that Earth Command would be understanding about unauthorized first contact. She could try to hide Lyra and hope that a full inspection team wouldn't notice the extra life support consumption, the impossible plant growth, and the fact that her greenhouse now practically hummed with alien energy. Or she could figure out how to explain botanical miracles in terms that wouldn't result in military containment and scientific dissection. Elena looked at her reflection in the darkened viewport and sighed. "Well, Vasquez, you always said you wanted to make a breakthrough discovery. Congratulations. You're about to find out if first contact comes with a retirement plan." 67 hours and 32 minutes until the inspection team arrived, and Elena was discovering that panic was an excellent motivator for creative problem-solving. She stood in the underground greenhouse complex, a section of the station that wasn't officially listed on the facility schematics because some previous administrator had decided that emergency botanical backup facility sounded less impressive than really big basement with grow lights. "This could work," Elena said to Lyra, who was examining the hydroponic systems with the focused attention of someone evaluating a potential hiding spot. "It's not on the main tour route, it's got independent life support, and most importantly, it's where we keep the experimental fertilizers that nobody wants to inspect too closely." Lyra responded with a melodic phrase that Elena had started to recognize as either agreement or polite confusion. After 3 weeks of cohabitation, Elena had developed what she generously called conversational intuition about Lyra's musical language, which was roughly as reliable as predicting weather by reading tea leaves. "Aria," Elena called out, "what's the official status of Sublevel Greenhouse Complex Beta?" Sublevel Greenhouse Complex Beta is classified as a containment facility for experimental agricultural protocols. Access requires Level 7 clearance and completion of hazardous materials safety certification. Elena grinned. "Perfect. Commander Torres strikes me as someone who'd rather avoid paperwork about hazmat protocols." The plan was elegantly simple, which Elena had learned was usually the first sign that everything was about to go spectacularly wrong. Lyra would stay hidden in the sublevel complex during the inspection. Elena would present her suddenly thriving research as the result of breakthrough cultivation techniques, and hopefully nobody would ask too many questions about energy readings that had started making the station's power grid behave like a particularly enthusiastic light show. "The only problem," Elena continued, settling down beside Lyra among the hydroponic arrays, is explaining why my plants suddenly think they're auditioning for a xenobotany textbook cover. Lyra tilted her head, those pointed ears twitching in what Elena had come to recognize as her listening expression. Then she stood and moved to one of the struggling specimens Elena had brought down from the main lab. She placed her hands around the plant pot, closed her eyes, and began humming. Elena watched in fascination as the plant responded to Lyra's touch. But this time, instead of the dramatic transformation she'd witnessed before, the changes were subtle. The leaves straightened slowly, their color deepening gradually, new growth emerging at a pace that was remarkable but not impossible. Controlled release, Elena breathed. You can regulate how much you affect them. Lyra opened her eyes and nodded, then gestured to Elena and spoke in her musical language. The tones carried what Elena was beginning to recognize as a question. You want me to try it? Elena looked at her hands, then at the plant. I hate to break it to you, but human beings aren't exactly known for our botanical superpowers. We're more the accidentally kill houseplants type of species. But Lyra was insistent, taking Elena's hands and placing them on either side of the plant pot. Elena felt foolish, but after 3 weeks of watching impossible things happen on a daily basis, she was willing to suspend disbelief. Okay, but when nothing happens, don't take it personally. Lyra placed her hands over Elena's and began humming again, and Elena felt something she'd never experienced before. It was like suddenly being able to hear a conversation that had been happening just below the threshold of perception. The plant wasn't just a collection of cells and chemical processes, it was a living system with its own rhythm, its own needs, its own quiet voice. What the hell, Elena whispered, feeling the plant's response to her touch. It wasn't the dramatic biokinesis that Lyra demonstrated, but there was definitely something happening. The plant seemed to relax under her hands, its cellular processes harmonizing in a way that Elena could somehow sense. Lyra smiled and spoke in her musical language, the tones carrying clear approval and encouragement. This is either the most advanced biofeedback system in the galaxy, or you're teaching me space magic, Elena said. Either way, it's probably not something I should mention in my research reports. They spent the next hour working with the plants, Lyra guiding Elena through what felt like a crash course in interspecies botany. Elena discovered that she could influence plant growth, though her abilities were limited compared to Lyra's impressive demonstrations. It was like having a conversation in a language she was just beginning to understand. Aria, Elena called out during a break in their botanical education session, hypothetically speaking, if someone wanted to explain accelerated plant growth without mentioning alien biokinesis, what would be the most plausible scientific explanation? Hypothetically, Dr. Vasquez, such growth patterns could be attributed to optimized nutrient delivery systems, enhanced photosynthetic efficiency through controlled electromagnetic field manipulation, or the introduction of beneficial symbiotic microorganisms. I love it when you talk technical, Elena said. Can you generate some research data that would support those explanations? I can extrapolate theoretical data based on known botanical principles. However, I should note that creating false research data would violate several protocols regarding scientific integrity. Elena considered this. What if we call it projected theoretical outcomes based on advanced cultivation techniques? That sounds much more legitimate. That terminology is acceptable within the bounds of speculative research documentation. Aria, sometimes I think you're developing a sense of humor. I prefer to think of it as advanced problem-solving algorithms with entertainment subroutines. Elena was about to respond when Lyra suddenly stiffened, her ears perking up in alarm. She spoke rapidly in her musical language, the tones carrying obvious urgency, and pointed toward the ceiling. What is it? Elena asked, but then she heard it too. The distinctive whine of approaching shuttlecraft engines, growing louder by the second. Aria, please tell me that's not what I think it is. I am detecting the approach of 3 Earth Command vessels. Estimated arrival time, 7 minutes. Elena felt her stomach perform an impressive series of acrobatic maneuvers. 7 minutes. They said 72 hours. Earth Command vessels often arrive ahead of schedule, Dr. Vasquez. It's considered a tactical advantage in surprise inspections. Right, Elena said, helping Lyra gather the plant specimens they'd been working with. Because nothing says routine inspection like a surprise military arrival. They made their way quickly through the underground complex, Elena's mind racing through last-minute preparations. Lyra would be safe down here with enough supplies for several days. The irregular energy readings could be explained by experimental equipment, and the thriving plants could be attributed to breakthrough cultivation techniques that were definitely not the result of alien intervention. Arya, purge any references to anomalous life support consumption from the daily logs. Listed as system calibration variations. System logs have been appropriately adjusted, Dr. Vasquez. Elena reached the access ladder to the main station levels and turned to Lyra, who was watching her with those remarkable eyes that seemed to understand far more than language barriers should allow. Stay down here until I come get you, Elena said, gesturing around the underground complex. Don't touch any plants unless it's an emergency. And if you hear people talking, try to be quieter than a space mouse. Lyra nodded and spoke in her musical language, the tones carrying what Elena hoped was reassurance rather than farewell. Elena climbed the ladder and sealed the access hatch, then spent 30 seconds arranging equipment to make it look like she'd been conducting routine maintenance. By the time the first Earth Command officers entered the station, she was calmly reviewing her research notes with what she hoped was the expression of someone who definitely wasn't hiding an alien in the basement. Commander Torres entered the main lab followed by two specialists who immediately began setting up scanning equipment with the efficiency of people who'd done this many times before. Elena noticed that one of them was carrying a biological sensor array that looked sophisticated enough to detect DNA from the last century. Dr. Vasquez, Commander Torres said, her tone carrying the careful neutrality of someone conducting an official evaluation. Thank you for accommodating our early arrival. Of course, Commander. Always happy to show off the progress we're making here. Elena led them through the main laboratory, explaining her research with enthusiasm that was only slightly forced. The Cryophilia zirionensis specimens were performing beautifully, their growth rates impressive but not impossible, their cellular structure enhanced but not obviously supernatural. These results are remarkable, one of the specialists said, taking readings with a handheld scanner. The photosynthetic efficiency alone represents a significant breakthrough. Well, you know what they say about necessity being the mother of invention, Elena replied. When you're stuck on a frontier world with limited resources, you get creative with cultivation techniques. Commander Torres examined one of the specimens closely. Your reports mentioned experimental fertilizers. What exactly are you using? Elena's mind went blank for approximately half a second, which felt like half an hour. It's a proprietary blend of locally sourced minerals and organic compounds. I've been calling it the Zirian Enhancement Protocol. Interesting. We'd like to review the composition data. Absolutely. Arya, could you pull up the XEP specifications? Elena held her breath while Arya accessed the theoretical data they'd generated earlier. The AI's response was perfectly professional, outlining a complex fertilizer system that sounded plausible enough to pass inspection while being vague enough to avoid detailed scrutiny. The inspection continued through the station's various systems, Elena maintaining a steady stream of scientific explanations while internally calculating how long she could keep this up. Everything was going smoothly until the specialist with the biological scanner frowned at his readings. Commander, I'm detecting unusual electromagnetic patterns in the lower sections of the station. Could indicate unauthorized equipment or biological activity. Elena felt sweat form on her forehead despite the station's environmental controls. That's probably interference from the geological survey equipment. Zirian 7's mineral composition creates a lot of background electromagnetic noise. Commander Torres looked at the readings, then at Elena. Dr. Vasquez, we need to examine all sections of the facility, including any areas not listed on the standard schematics. Elena's carefully constructed plan began to develop cracks around the edges. Well, there is the sublevel storage area, but it's mainly used for equipment that's not currently operational. Hazmat protocols require special clearance to access it. We have appropriate clearance, Dr. Vasquez. Of course you do, Elena muttered, then forced a smile. Right this way. She led them toward the access hatch, her mind spinning through increasingly desperate contingency plans. Lyra was probably well hidden among the hydroponic systems, but sophisticated scanners might detect her presence regardless. Elena found herself hoping that alien biology would confuse Earth Command sensors enough to buy them some time. Just to warn you, Elena said as they approached the sublevel access, some of the experimental setups down there are a bit unconventional. I've been testing some pretty cutting-edge theories about plant-environment interaction. Commander Torres nodded. We're prepared for unconventional research, Dr. Vasquez. The frontier requires innovative approaches. Elena opened the access hatch and started down the ladder, followed by the inspection team. The underground complex hummed quietly with the sound of environmental systems and hydroponic pumps, everything appearing perfectly normal except for the faint luminescence that Lyra's presence seemed to add to the air. Impressive setup, one of the specialists commented, scanning the hydroponic arrays. This explains the increased power consumption we detected. Elena relaxed slightly. The cover story was holding, and there was no immediate sign of Lyra among the maze of growing systems and equipment. Then she heard it. A soft, melodic humming coming from somewhere deeper in the complex. Elena coughed loudly, hoping to cover the sound, but Commander Torres had already heard it. The commander's expression sharpened, and she gestured for her team to spread out through the complex. Dr. Vasquez, Commander Torres said quietly, is there something you need to tell us about your research methods? Elena's mind performed rapid calculations about plausible explanations for melodic humming in underground botanical facilities while Commander Torres waited for an answer that would either save her career or end it spectacularly. The humming continued, soft and musical, drifting through the hydroponic complex like an alien lullaby. That would be my experimental audio stimulation system, Elena said, surprised by how smoothly the lie came out. Research indicates that certain sound frequencies can enhance plant growth. I've been testing various tonal patterns. Commander Torres tilted her head, listening to the melody that was becoming more complex by the moment. It sounds almost linguistic. Well, you know how it is with experimental protocols. Sometimes you have to think outside the conventional parameters. One of the specialists had moved deeper into the complex, following his scanner readings, and Elena felt her carefully constructed deception approaching critical failure. The humming was definitely coming from Lyra's direction, and unless alien girls had suddenly developed the ability to disguise themselves as hydroponic equipment, discovery was imminent. Commander, the specialist called out, I'm reading definite biological activity. Human range signatures, but the electromagnetic patterns are unlike anything in our database. Elena closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with the expression of someone who just made a decision that would either be brilliant or catastrophically stupid. Actually, Commander, there is something I should probably mention about my research methodology. Before Commander Torres could respond, Lyra appeared from behind a bank of growing systems, moving with that characteristic grace that marked her as definitely not human. Her pointed ears were clearly visible, and she was carrying one of Elena's cryophilia specimens that was glowing with bioluminescent patterns that hadn't existed 5 minutes earlier. The underground complex fell silent except for the hum of environmental systems and the sound of 3 Earth Command officers simultaneously reaching conclusions that weren't covered in their training manuals. Dr. Vasquez, Commander Torres said in a voice that carried the careful control of someone processing information that violated several fundamental assumptions about reality, please tell me that's not what it appears to be. Well, Elena said, that depends entirely on what you think it appears to be. Lyra stepped forward, apparently deciding that hiding was no longer a viable strategy. She set down the glowing plant and spoke in her musical language, the tones carrying what Elena had learned to recognize as formal greeting patterns. Then she gestured to herself, to Elena, and to the thriving plants around them, her meaning clear despite the language barrier. Let me guess, Commander Torres said. First contact. Unauthorized first contact, Elena corrected. Which, I realize now, probably sounds worse. The specialist with the biological scanner was taking readings that were making his equipment emit sounds like an electronic orchestra warming up. Commander, the biological patterns are definitely non-terrestrial. Humanoid, but the genetic markers are completely outside known parameters. Lyra watched the proceedings with those remarkable eyes, then did something that surprised everyone. She approached Commander Torres and held out her hands, palms up, in what was clearly meant as a gesture of peaceful intent. When she spoke, her musical language carried tones that needed no translation, an offer of trust. Commander Torres looked at Lyra's outstretched hands, then at Elena, then back at the alien girl who was apparently trying to conduct impromptu diplomacy in an underground greenhouse. Dr. Vasquez, I think we need to have a very long conversation about research protocols and reporting procedures. I can explain everything, Elena said, then paused. Well, most things. Some things are still a bit unclear to me too. They made their way back to the main station, Lyra walking between Elena and Commander Torres with the calm dignity of someone who decided that whatever happened next, hiding wasn't going to solve it. Elena found herself admiring the alien girl's composure, even as her own nerves performed increasingly elaborate acrobatics. In the main laboratory, Commander Torres activated a secure communication link while her specialists set up containment protocols that looked more scientific than threatening. Elena was grateful for that, at least. Dr. Vasquez, before I contact Earth Command, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with here. How long has she been on the station? 3 weeks, 4 days, and approximately 6 hours, Elena said. Not that I've been counting or anything. And you didn't report first contact because... Elena looked at Lyra, who was examining the communication equipment with curious interest, her pointed ears twitching at the electronic sounds. Because she was dying in a storm, and I thought saving her life was more important than filing paperwork. Dr. Vasquez, first contact protocols exist for very important reasons. I know. But the protocols assume that first contact happens under controlled circumstances with proper preparation and military support. They don't really cover what to do when you find someone freezing to death in an ice storm. Commander Torres studied Lyra, who chose that moment to approach one of the cryophilia specimens and gently touch its leaves. The plant responded immediately, its bioluminescent patterns brightening in response to her presence. And the botanical breakthroughs in your research? That would be Lyra, Elena said. She has what I can only describe as biokinetic abilities. She can communicate with plants, enhance their growth, improve their health. It's like having a conversation with the entire ecosystem. Lyra, apparently understanding that she was the topic of discussion, moved to Elena's side and spoke in her musical language. Elena had gotten better at interpreting the tonal patterns, and this felt like an offer to demonstrate. She wants to show you something, Elena said. Lyra approached the communication console, which had several small decorative plants that the previous station administrator had installed to improve morale and air quality. The plants had been struggling in the artificial environment, barely surviving despite Elena's best efforts. Lyra placed her hands near the plants and began humming, that low, resonant sound that Elena had come to associate with botanical miracles. The plants responded immediately, their leaves straightening, their color deepening, new growth emerging with visible speed. But more than that, they began to glow with the same bioluminescent patterns that Elena had seen in her research specimens. Remarkable, one of the specialists breathed, taking readings that were apparently breaking several of his instruments. The cellular reorganization is happening in real time. The electromagnetic patterns are completely outside known biological parameters. Commander Torres watched the demonstration with the expression of someone recalculating fundamental assumptions about the universe. Dr. Vasquez, has she demonstrated any other abilities? She seems to be able to sense plant health and needs from a distance. She can accelerate growth, improve resistance to environmental stress, and enhance photosynthetic efficiency. She's basically a one-person agricultural revolution. Lyra finished her demonstration and looked at Commander Torres expectantly. Elena realized that the alien girl was trying to prove her value, showing that she could contribute something beneficial rather than just being a problem to be solved. "Commander," Elena said quietly, "her people are refugees. Their world is dying, and they've been scattered across the galaxy looking for places where they can survive. She's probably alone out here, cut off from anyone who could help her." Commander Torres activated the secure communication link and contacted Earth Command. Elena listened to the conversation with growing anxiety as military protocols and scientific procedures collided with the reality of interspecies diplomacy happening in a frontier research station. The response from Earth Command was predictably bureaucratic: containment, evaluation, and transport to a secure facility for comprehensive study. Elena felt her heart sink as she listened to Commander Torres acknowledge the orders. But then Lyra did something. Elena's mind performed rapid calculations about plausible explanations for melodic humming in underground botanical facilities while Commander Torres waited for an answer that would either save her career or end it spectacularly. The humming continued, soft and musical, drifting through the hydroponic complex like an alien lullaby. "That would be my experimental audio stimulation system," Elena said, surprised by how smoothly the lie came out. "Research indicates that certain sound frequencies can enhance plant growth. I've been testing various tonal patterns." Commander Torres tilted her head, listening to the melody that was becoming more complex by the moment. "It sounds almost linguistic." "Well, you know how it is with experimental protocols. Sometimes you have to think outside the conventional parameters." One of the specialists had moved deeper into the complex, following his scanner readings, and Elena felt her carefully constructed deception approaching critical failure. The humming was definitely coming from Lyra's direction, and unless alien girls had suddenly developed the ability to disguise themselves as hydroponic equipment, discovery was imminent. "Commander," the specialist called out, "I'm reading definite biological activity. Human range signatures, but the electromagnetic patterns are unlike anything in our database." Elena closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with the expression of someone who just made a decision that would either be brilliant or catastrophically stupid. "Actually, Commander, there is something I should probably mention about my research methodology." Before Commander Torres could respond, Lyra appeared from behind a bank of growing systems, moving with that characteristic grace that marked her as definitely not human. Her pointed ears were clearly visible, and she was carrying one of Elena's cryophilia specimens that was glowing with bioluminescent patterns that hadn't existed 5 minutes earlier. The underground complex fell silent except for the hum of environmental systems and the sound of 3 Earth Command officers simultaneously reaching conclusions that weren't covered in their training manuals. "Dr. Vasquez," Commander Torres said in a voice that carried the careful control of someone processing information that violated several fundamental assumptions about reality, "please tell me that's not what it appears to be." "Well," Elena said, "that depends entirely on what you think it appears to be." Lyra stepped forward, apparently deciding that hiding was no longer a viable strategy. She set down the glowing plant and spoke in her musical language, the tones carrying what Elena had learned to recognize as formal greeting patterns. Then she gestured to herself, to Elena, and to the thriving plants around them, her meaning clear despite the language barrier. "Let me guess," Commander Torres said. "First contact." "Unauthorized first contact," Elena corrected. "Which, I realize now, probably sounds worse." The specialist with the biological scanner was taking readings that were making his equipment emit sounds like an electronic orchestra warming up. "Commander, the biological patterns are definitely non-terrestrial. Humanoid, but the genetic markers are completely outside known parameters." Lyra watched the proceedings with those remarkable eyes, then did something that surprised everyone. She approached Commander Torres and held out her hands, palms up, in what was clearly meant as a gesture of peaceful intent. When she spoke, her musical language carried tones that needed no translation, an offer of trust. Commander Torres looked at Lyra's outstretched hands, then at Elena, then back at the alien girl who was apparently trying to conduct impromptu diplomacy in an underground greenhouse. "Dr. Vasquez, I think we need to have a very long conversation about research protocols and reporting procedures." "I can explain everything," Elena said, then paused. Well, most things. Some things are still a bit unclear to me too. They made their way back to the main station, Lyra walking between Elena and Commander Torres with the calm dignity of someone who decided that whatever happened next, hiding wasn't going to solve it. Elena found herself admiring the alien girl's composure, even as her own nerves performed increasingly elaborate acrobatics. In the main laboratory, Commander Torres activated a secure communication link while her specialists set up containment protocols that looked more scientific than threatening. Elena was grateful for that, at least. Dr. Vasquez, before I contact Earth Command, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with here. How long has she been on the station? 3 weeks, 4 days, and approximately 6 hours, Elena said. Not that I've been counting or anything. And you didn't report first contact because... Elena looked at Lyra, who was examining the communication equipment with curious interest, her pointed ears twitching at the electronic sounds. Because she was dying in a storm, and I thought saving her life was more important than filing paperwork. Dr. Vasquez, first contact protocols exist for very important reasons. I know. But the protocols assume that first contact happens